I want you to close your eyes for just a moment. Try to remember the very specific, comforting smell of a traditional Dutch brown cafe on a rainy Friday afternoon. Can you smell the rich, heavy scent of rolling tobacco mixing with the aroma of spilled pilsner on dark wooden tables? Can you hear the ticking of the old wall clock and the cheerful clinking of tiny beer glasses? Today, we are taking a slow, comforting journey back to the 1960s, 70s and 80s in the Netherlands. We are going to look at 20 everyday things, habits and rituals that were completely normal back then, but are today totally illegal, banned or strictly heavily regulated. As we walk down memory lane, you might just find yourself longing for one specific, deeply touching childhood freedom that we will talk about at the very end of our journey. Before we dive into these forgotten memories, let us pause and remember how time itself felt completely different back then. In the 1970s and 1980s, the days seemed to stretch out endlessly, without the constant, nervous buzzing of smartphones or the pressure of endless notifications. We actually had to wait for things, and in that waiting, we found true value. We waited for the evening news on television, we waited for the postman to bring a handwritten letter, and we waited for our friends to show up at the street corner. There is a modern myth that without our current technology, our lives were somehow poorer or less connected. But those of us who lived through it know the exact opposite is true. Our lives were immensely rich in genuine human connection, in physical touch, and in a shared sense of community. We lived out in the streets, in the neighborhoods, and in the wild nature, experiencing the world with all our senses. The rules were fewer, the freedom was greater, and the trust we had in each other was the invisible glue that held our local communities together. And now let us remember our first forgotten reality. Imagine stepping out of the cold, biting Dutch rain and pushing open the heavy wooden door of your local brown cafe. The immediate warmth enveloped you, along with a thick, unmistakable blue haze. Back then, smoking indoors was not just normal, it was an integral part of the culture. You could smell the distinct, rich aroma of popular rolling tobacco mixed with the scent of damp wool coats and old wood. Men and women stood at the bar, expertly rolling a cigarette with one hand while holding a small glass of beer in the other. There were heavy glass ashtrays on every single table, right next to the little Persian carpets used as coasters. Even on the trains, in the offices, and at birthday parties where the living room would fill up in minutes, the blue smoke was a sign of that unique Dutch coziness. Today, lighting up a cigarette inside any public building is strictly forbidden by law. The air in the cafes is clear now. The heavy glass ashtrays are gone forever, and while our lungs are certainly much healthier, sometimes we cannot help but miss the profound sense of community that hung in that smoky, dimly lit air, where time seemed to stand still. Let us move on to the feeling of absolute freedom on two wheels. If you were a teenager in the 1970s or 1980s in the Netherlands, your moped was your most prized possession. Whether you rode a high-handled Pug, a roaring Kreidler or a sleek Zündap, that machine was your ticket to true independence. You would spend hours in the shed, fine-tuning the engine, polishing the chrome and making sure it sounded just right. But the most glorious part of the experience was riding it through the flat, windy polders with absolutely no helmet on your head. You could feel the cool Dutch wind rushing through your hair. Young men would spend considerable time styling their hair with thick gel or cream, and a heavy helmet would have completely ruined the entire look. You could hear the roar of the engine and feel the sun on your face as you rode to school or to the local youth club. Today, riding a moped without a heavy, certified safety helmet is entirely illegal and heavily fined. The law changed to protect us, and rightly so, but those who experienced it will never forget the raw, unfiltered sensation of flying down a long country road, wind in your hair, with not a single care in the world. Now, let us think back to how we socialized and grew up in the local neighborhood pubs. In those days, the transition into adulthood happened much earlier and much more naturally. It was perfectly legal and completely normal for a 16-year-old to walk into a bar and order a glass of beer, or even a small glass of traditional Dutch jenever. There were no strict identity card checks at the door and no harsh regulations stopping young people from joining the adults. The bartender usually knew your parents, your uncles, and your older brothers. It was a community space where you learned how to behave by simply watching the older generation. You would stand at the bar feeling tremendously grown up, holding a cold glass while listening to the men debate local politics or football. It was a gentle initiation into adult society, supervised not by strict laws, but by the watchful eyes of the neighborhood. Today, selling alcohol to anyone under 18 is strictly illegal, and the entire atmosphere of youth socialization has shifted away from these mixed-generation gathering places. We protected the youth, but we also lost that unique, trusting environment where a teenager could slowly learn the unwritten rules of adulthood. Do you remember the pure excitement of going on a family holiday to the south of France? Or perhaps just a sunny weekend trip to the crowded beaches of Scheveningen? If you were part of a large family in the 1970s, fitting everyone into the car was a creative challenge. It was completely normal, and totally legal, for the youngest children to simply climb over the back seats and sit in the trunk of the station wagon. We would lay out thick woolen blankets, bring our favorite comic books, and create a cozy little fortress back there among the suitcases and the cooler box. There were absolutely no seatbelts in the back, and no one even worried about it. We would wave at the cars driving behind us, play endless games of cards, and fall asleep to the gentle humming of the tires on the asphalt. It felt like a magical, moving playground. Today, the thought of putting a child in the trunk without a seatbelt is not only illegal, it is considered deeply shocking and dangerous. Modern safety laws require strict car seats and restraints for everyone. The safety is wonderful, but nothing will ever replicate the cozy, bouncing freedom of riding in the back of that old family station wagon. As winter approached and the holidays ended, a very specific neighborhood ritual would take place. Do you recall the chaotic excitement of the annual Christmas tree hunt? In the first weeks of January, gangs of local children would roam the streets, dragging discarded pine trees behind them. We would gather dozens, sometimes hundreds of trees and pile them up on a street corner or a local sandy square. Then, as the evening fell, the older boys would set the entire mountain of dry pine on fire. The flames would shoot high into the dark winter sky, illuminating the brick houses and warming our freezing faces. The sharp, nostalgic smell of burning pine needles and wood smoke would hang in the neighborhood air for days. Neighbors would come out of their houses to watch, chatting with each other in the glowing light. Today, starting a massive, unregulated bonfire in the middle of a residential street is strictly illegal and closely monitored by the police and fire departments due to safety and environmental concerns. The trees are now neatly collected by municipal trucks. It is cleaner and safer, but that wild communal magic of the neighborhood winter fire has completely vanished from our streets. Speaking of fire and excitement, let us wander back to the months leading up to New Year's Eve. Long before December 31st arrived, the streets of the Netherlands were alive with the deafening echoes of heavy fireworks. It was completely normal for teenagers to buy loud bangers, known to us as rotjes, or the infamous strikers, and light them off on the sidewalks in the middle of November. You could smell the distinct, sharp odor of sulfur lingering in the cold afternoon air everywhere you walked. We would put them under tin cans to see how high they would fly, or drop them into empty glass bottles. It was a loud, chaotic and thrilling part of growing up. Shopkeepers sold them with very few restrictions, and the police rarely intervened unless things got completely out of hand. Today, the sale and use of such fireworks is heavily restricted and in many places completely banned. Lighting a firecracker on a random Tuesday in November would immediately result in a severe fine or a visit from the authorities. The streets are much quieter now, and certainly safer for our pets, but the rebellious, explosive thrill of those dark winter afternoons is a thing of the completely distant past. Let us take a journey away from the city streets and into the rural heart of the country. In the 1960s and 70s, buying milk was often a highly personal, sensory experience. Instead of walking into a sterile, brightly lit supermarket to buy a plastic jug, many families would take a bicycle ride to the local dairy farmer. We would carry a heavy, metal milk churn swinging from the handlebars. At the farm, you would step into the warm, earthy-smelling barn. The farmer would take a large ladle and fill your churn directly from his cooling tank with fresh, unpasteurized, raw milk. It was thick, creamy, and completely untreated. You could taste the changing of the seasons in that milk. We drank it straight, or our mothers would boil it on the stove, creating a thick skin on top that the children would fight over. Today, selling untreated raw milk directly to consumers without incredibly strict hygiene and pasteurization regulations is illegal due to health and safety laws. Our food is safer and lasts much longer on the shelf, but that beautiful, direct connection to the land and the farmer has been replaced by cold, anonymous supermarket aisles. Another vivid memory of the outdoors was the common practice of managing our own garden waste. In almost every backyard or allotment garden, there was a rusty, heavily dented metal barrel. During the crisp days of autumn, when the leaves fell thickly from the trees, or when it was time to clean out the old newspapers from the garage, people simply threw it all into the barrel and struck a match. The neighborhood would quickly fill with the thick, romantic scent of burning wood and smoldering leaves. People would stand around the barrel, warming their hands on the heated metal, watching the orange embers glow in the fading afternoon light. It was an incredibly practical, self-sufficient way to keep the yard tidy. Today, burning your own household or garden waste in the backyard is completely illegal in the Netherlands. Strict environmental laws and air quality regulations mean that everything must be separated and taken to the local recycling center. The air is cleaner and our lungs are grateful, but the comforting autumnal smell of 100 small garden fires has been entirely erased from our modern weekend experience. Let us reflect on a reality that was once considered a normal part of raising a child. In the homes and classrooms of the 1960s and 70s, discipline was swift and physical. If a child misbehaved, talked back to an elder, or did something dangerous, it was completely acceptable for a parent or even a strict school teacher to give them a quick slap on the wrist or the bottom. This was known as the educational smack. It was rarely done out of malice, but rather seen as an immediate, clear boundary-setting tool. A teacher could send you to the corner, pull your ear, or give you a tap with a wooden ruler. And if you complained to your parents at home, you were likely to get another one for causing trouble at school. Today, any form of physical punishment towards children is strictly forbidden by law. The legal shift was incredibly important for protecting the vulnerable and changing how we view child psychology. Yet, looking back, it reminds us of a time when the entire village felt responsible for raising a child, and authority figures were respected without question, creating a much simpler, albeit stricter, social order. Weekends in the 1970s were a time for practical, hands-on work around the house and the car. One of the most common sights on a Saturday morning was seeing fathers lying on their backs underneath an old Opel or Ford in the middle of the residential street. They were performing their own car maintenance, most notably changing the thick black motor oil. It was perfectly normal to place an old metal pan underneath the engine, drain the dirty oil, and sometimes, if the pan overflowed, let it wash right down the street drains into the sewer. You could smell the heavy metallic scent of grease and gasoline in the air. Men would chat with their neighbors from underneath the chassis, their hands stained deep black with dirt. Today, allowing even a single drop of chemical motor oil to enter the public drainage system is a serious environmental crime heavily penalized by law. Car maintenance has become highly computerized, hidden away behind the closed doors of expensive professional garages. We saved our rivers and soils, but we lost that beautiful, messy street-side camaraderie of weekend mechanics. Now, think about the ultimate expression of trust and adventure. If you needed to travel across the country to visit a friend, or if you were a student with very little money, you simply walked to the entrance of the national highway. You held up a piece of cardboard with the name of your destination written in thick black marker, stuck out your thumb, and waited. Hitchhiking was an incredibly common, completely acceptable way to travel. Drivers would pull over on the highway ramps, clear the passenger seat of newspapers, and welcome a total stranger into their car. You would share stories, listen to the radio together, and trust each other completely. It was a beautiful testament to the social cohesion of the era. Today, walking or standing on the highway ramps is strictly illegal and highly dangerous due to the sheer volume and speed of modern traffic. Furthermore, the immense trust we once had in strangers has slowly been eroded by a culture of fear and caution. Hitchhiking has practically vanished, taking with it the chance encounters and spontaneous conversations that made every journey a unique, deeply human adventure. Let us turn our minds to the summer holidays and the desire to escape into nature. Back then, if you owned a simple canvas tent and a sleeping bag, the entire country felt like your personal campground. It was wonderfully normal to take your bicycle right out to the deep forests of the Velve or the rolling sandy dunes along the coastline and simply pitch your tent wherever you thought the view was best. This wild camping was a true escape. You would wake up to the absolute silence of nature, the chirping of early morning birds, and the smell of dew on the grass. There were no wardens, no expensive permits, and no designated numbered spots. You were completely alone with the elements. Today, wild camping anywhere in the Netherlands is strictly forbidden by law. To protect our vulnerable nature reserves from overcrowding and pollution, you must now stay within the heavily regulated, fenced boundaries of commercial campsites. The untouched wilderness is preserved, but the romantic, spontaneous freedom of sleeping under the stars wherever you please is a luxury we have permanently lost. Do you remember the constant sound of hammering and sawing in the suburban gardens during the 1970s? Do-it-yourself projects were a massive part of home ownership. If you needed a new roof for your bicycle shed or you wanted to build a small garage, you would head to the local hardware store and buy corrugated sheets of a true miracle material. We worked with it constantly, cutting it with handsaws, unaware of the fine, white dust covering our clothes and skin. This material was cheap, fireproof and completely resistant to the wet Dutch weather. Of course, I am talking about asbestos. It was everywhere, in our walls, our roofs and our heating pipes. Neighbors would help each other install it on a Saturday afternoon, completely unprotected. Today, the handling, sale and installation of this material is heavily regulated and strictly illegal for normal citizens. Removing it requires professionals in full hazmat suits and breathing apparatus. We now know the tragic health consequences it carried, but looking back, it is surreal to realize how innocently and freely we handled something so incredibly dangerous in our own backyards. Let us step back into the magical, dangerous world of childhood play. After the workmen packed up their tools and went home at 5 o'clock, the local construction sites transformed into the most incredible playgrounds imaginable. Neighborhood children would easily sneak past the flimsy ropes and spend hours exploring the half-built brick houses. We climbed the wooden scaffolding like monkeys, ran across unfinished floor beams, and used the massive piles of yellow construction sand as mountains for our toy cars. There were exposed nails, deep holes, and unstable walls everywhere. It was a dangerous, thrilling environment where we learned to balance, assess risks, and help each other climb higher. Today, every construction site is legally required to be surrounded by tall, impenetrable steel fences, locked gates and security cameras. Trespassing is completely illegal and heavily enforced. We have protected our children from physical harm, but in doing so, we have also fenced off the wild, unsupervised, imaginative adventures that taught us so much about bravery and the physical limits of the world. If you woke up with a terrible winter cough in the 1980s, the solution was simple and incredibly effective. You would walk down to the local drugstore, chat with the shopkeeper, and purchase a heavy, dark bottle of cough syrup. There was no need for a doctor's visit or a complicated prescription. This syrup was thick, tasted strongly of sweet licorice and chemicals, and it worked like absolute magic. The reason it worked so well was that it was heavily laced with strong ingredients like codeine. You would take a large spoonful before bed and you would sleep heavily, completely undisturbed by your cold. It was a trusted, normal household remedy sitting in every medicine cabinet. Today, buying such potent, mind-altering medicine without a strict prescription from a certified doctor is totally illegal. The laws were changed to prevent addiction and dangerous side effects. Modern medicine is much safer and heavily controlled, but anyone who remembers the instant soothing relief of that thick, dark syrup knows that today's over-the-counter remedies simply do not compare to the powerful cues of our past. Another everyday reality of the streets was the constant presence of our four-legged friends. In the 1970s, it was completely normal to open your front door in the morning and simply let your dog out to roam the neighborhood. Dogs walk the streets without leashes, sniffing around the bushes, greeting the local children, and visiting the butcher's back door for scraps. The neighborhood dogs all knew each other, forming their own little packs. And of course, no one ever carried a plastic bag to clean up after them. Stepping in dog mess was just an unfortunate, accepted part of walking on the sidewalk. Today, strict leash laws and mandatory cleanup regulations make this completely illegal. If you let your dog roam free, or if you fail to clean up, you will be heavily fined by the local authorities. The streets are undoubtedly much cleaner and safer for everyone now. But the charming, chaotic sight of the local neighborhood dogs going about their independent daily business is a memory completely lost to modern regulations. Let us return to the thrill of the open road, this time on a heavier machine. If your father or your uncle owned a powerful motorcycle, getting a ride on the back was the ultimate weekend treat. You would hop onto the leather seat behind them, wrap your arms tightly around their waist, and hold on for dear life. You were wearing nothing but your everyday clothes, a pair of jeans, a simple t-shirt, and absolutely no safety helmet. Early on, the law did not require passengers to wear protective headgear. You could feel the immense vibration of the engine through your whole body, and the wind would whip tears into your eyes as you accelerated down the highway. It was an exhilarating, terrifying, and deeply bonding experience. Today, carrying a passenger on a motorcycle without a heavy, certified helmet and proper protective clothing is strictly illegal. The risk of terrible injury was simply too high. We traded that raw, unprotected thrill for a much-needed blanket of safety, ensuring that our children return home safely from every ride. As the final days of December approached, a tradition unique to the countryside and the quieter suburbs would begin to echo through the streets. I'm talking about the incredibly loud, heart-pounding ritual of shooting calcium carbide. Groups of men and teenage boys would drag heavy, steel milk churns into the middle of the residential streets. They would place a piece of carbide inside, add a little water, wait for the dangerous gas to build up, and quickly hammer a leather football into the opening. Then, someone would hold a burning stick to a small hole in the back. The resulting explosion was absolutely deafening, shaking the glass in the windows of the nearby terraced houses and sending the football flying hundreds of meters down the road. It was an aggressive, joyful celebration of noise. Today, doing this in a normal residential street is completely illegal. It is now heavily regulated, restricted to open fields outside the city limits and only allowed during specific hours. The tradition survives in a controlled manner, but the wild, neighborhood-shaking explosions right on your doorstep are gone forever. Think back to the simple joy of street food before the era of plastic gloves and digital thermometers. On a Saturday afternoon at the local market, you would invariably find the traditional herring cart or the warm, sugary oliebollen stand. The man selling the raw herring would grab the fish with his bare hands, expertly clean it with a small knife, dip it in raw onions, and hand it directly to you by the tail. There were no modern hygiene certificates framed on the wall, no refrigerated glass displays with digital temperature readouts, and no strict inspections from health authorities. It was just good, honest food, prepared the same way it had been for centuries. You trusted the vendor and his reputation was his only certificate. Today, operating a street food stall without adhering to a mountain of strict, legally binding hygiene regulations is completely illegal. Food safety is paramount and the risk of illness has plummeted. Yet the sterile, heavily regulated modern food carts sometimes lack the authentic, unpolished charm of the men who fed our neighborhoods with their bare, hard-working hands. And now we arrive at one of the most beautiful, liberating memories of a Dutch summer. When the heatwave finally hit, the local swimming pools were often too crowded or too expensive. Instead, children and teenagers would flock to the large commercial canals, rivers, and active shipping channels. It was totally normal to climb up onto the heavy steel bridges and dive headfirst into the dark, murky water right as massive transport barges were passing by. We swam in the exact same water where industrial ships dropped their anchors. There were no water quality checks, no warning signs about dangerous currents, and no police boats telling us to get out. It was a wild, unsupervised, and deeply refreshing adventure. Today, swimming in these busy commercial waterways is strictly illegal due to the extreme danger of heavy shipping traffic and completely invisible underwater currents. The authorities closely monitor the bridges and the heavy fines keep the youth away. We have constructed safe chlorinated pools, but we profoundly miss the wild, rebellious joy of diving off a sun-baked bridge into the deep, mysterious waters of our youth. As we look back at these 20 forgotten realities, it becomes incredibly clear that what we truly miss is not the danger, the smoke, or the lack of safety belts. We do not want to return to a time of unsafe cars or dangerous materials. What we are really longing for is the profound sense of trust, the unstructured freedom, and the deep physical connection to our community that defined the 1970s and 1980s in the Netherlands. We miss a time when life was a little less regulated and we were allowed to figure things out for ourselves. If this slow nostalgic journey brought back a piece of your youth, please subscribe to the channel and leave a like on this video. It helps us keep these precious memories alive. Now, I have an open question for you. Which of these lost freedoms do you miss the absolute most, or did you have a different, slightly dangerous childhood ritual that you look back on with a smile? Please share your personal story in the comments below. We read every single one of them and we cannot wait to remember together.